London, 1872. The carriage wheels rattled against the cobblestones, sending vibrations through the elegant vehicle as it proceeded down the rain-slicked streets of Mayfair. Inside, Natalie Harrington, the Duchess of Westmoreland, sat with perfect posture, her gloved hands folded in her lap, betraying nothing of the turmoil that raged within her breast. "Your Grace, we've arrived," announced the footman, opening the carriage door to reveal the grandeur of Huntington House, ablaze with light for the season's most anticipated ball. Natalie took a steadying breath, adjusting the silver filigree mask that concealed half her face. It had been 5 years since she had attended a society function of this magnitude, 5 years since her name had been whispered with scorn in every drawing-room from Belgravia to Kensington. The forgotten Duchess, they called her, the woman who had vanished from London following her husband's death, retreating to the country estate of Westmoreland Park, where she had become little more than a ghost story to the ton. But tonight everything would change. Announcing Her Grace, the Duchess of Westmoreland, the butler intoned, his voice carrying across the ballroom, conversations faltered, fans stilled. 100 pairs of eyes turned to regard the black-clad figure who stood at the entrance. At 32, Natalie Harrington possessed a different kind of beauty than she had in her youth, something more refined, more dignified, shaped by sorrow and solitude. "I didn't think she'd actually come," whispered Lady Pembroke behind her fan. "5 years since the Duke's death, and now she reappears. There must be a reason," replied her companion. Natalie moved through the crowd with practiced grace, though her heart hammered against her ribcage. These people had once been her peers, her friends, before scandal and heartbreak had forced her retreat. Now they were strangers, curious vultures waiting to pick at the carcass of her reputation. She caught sight of her hostess and made her way forward. "Lady Huntington, thank you for your kind invitation." The older woman's eyes widened with surprise before she mastered her expression. "Your Grace, we are honored by your presence. It has been far too long since you graced London with your company." "Indeed," Natalie replied, her voice betraying nothing of her inner thoughts. "I find that grief has a timetable all its own." "Of course, my dear," Lady Huntington patted her arm sympathetically. "The late Duke was much beloved. Such a tragedy, taken so young." A tragedy, yes, that was the polite fiction London society had constructed around her husband's death. A riding accident, they said. A terrible, unfortunate accident that had left her widowed at 27. If only they knew the truth. "Would you care for some refreshment?" Lady Huntington asked, already motioning for a footman. "Thank you, but I believe I shall circulate a bit. It has been so long since I've seen many old acquaintances." Natalie moved away, aware of the whispers that followed in her wake. She had anticipated this reaction, had prepared herself for it during the long carriage ride from Surrey. What she had not prepared for was the sight of Lord Kenton Queensberry across the room, his tall frame unmistakable even after all these years. Her steps faltered imperceptibly. He stood conversing with a group of gentlemen, his dark evening clothes a stark contrast to his fair hair. At 40, he remained as handsome as he had been in his youth, perhaps more so, with the distinguished lines that now framed his eyes and the slight silver at his temples. As if sensing her gaze, he turned. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and the world around them seemed to still. For a moment, just a moment, the years fell away, and they were young again, foolish, passionate, desperately in love. Then his expression hardened, and he turned deliberately away. Natalie felt as though she had been struck. She had expected coldness, perhaps indifference, but not this cutting dismissal, not from him. She forced herself to continue circulating, exchanging pleasant nothings with people who had once shunned her, all while the weight of Kenton's rejection pressed against her chest. "Your Grace," came a voice at her elbow. "What an unexpected pleasure." She turned to find Lord Edmund Fairchild, an old family friend, and one of the few who had stood by her during the scandal. "Lord Fairchild," she said warmly, genuinely pleased to see a friendly face. "How are you?" Better for seeing you back in London, he replied, his kind eyes studying her face. Though I must ask, why now? After all this time. Natalie hesitated. Perhaps I grew tired of hiding. Or perhaps there's another reason entirely, he suggested, nodding discreetly toward where Kenton stood. You always were too perceptive for your own good, Edmund, she murmured, and you always underestimated your importance to those who care for you, he countered. Be careful, Natalie. London society has a long memory. So do I, she replied, her gaze drifting once more to Kenton. So do I. The orchestra struck up a waltz, and couples began to form on the dance floor. Natalie watched, remembering another ball, another waltz, another lifetime ago. She had been so certain then that love would conquer all, that passion and devotion would overcome any obstacle. How naive she had been. Duchess! The deep voice behind her sent a shiver down her spine. She turned slowly, coming face to face with Kenton Queensberry for the first time in 5 years. Lord Queensberry, she acknowledged, proud that her voice remained steady. May I have this dance? He asked formally, extending his hand. 100 responses flashed through her mind, refusals, accusations, pleas. In the end, she simply placed her gloved hand in his and allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor. His hand at her waist was proper, the distance between them correct to the inch, yet Natalie felt as though she were standing in the midst of a lightning storm. They moved together with the ease of longtime partners, their bodies remembering what their minds sought to forget. I didn't expect to see you here, he said finally, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. Clearly, she replied. Your reaction made that quite evident. A muscle ticked in his jaw. What did you expect, Natalie? That I would welcome you with open arms after you disappeared without a word. I wrote to you, she said, surprised by his accusation. 1 letter, he countered. 1 letter saying you needed time and then silence. 5 years of silence. The bitterness in his voice cut her deeply. I had my reasons. I'm sure you did, he replied coldly, just as I'm sure you have your reasons for returning now. They completed a turn, and Natalie caught sight of several onlookers watching them with undisguised interest. We're causing a stir, she observed. Let them talk, it's what they do best. The music swelled around them, and for a moment, Natalie allowed herself to remember how it had felt to be in his arms without the weight of tragedy and misunderstanding between them. Why did you ask me to dance if you're so angry with me? She asked finally. His blue eyes, once so warm when they looked at her, were now guarded. Because despite everything, I needed to know if you were well. The simple admission touched her more deeply than any grand declaration could have. I am surviving, she answered honestly. Is that why you've returned, to do more than survive? The question hung between them as the music drew to a close. Kenton stepped back, bowing formally as Natalie curtsied. Perhaps, she said quietly, I've returned to right a wrong. Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone on the dance floor, surrounded by curious onlookers. Lady Pembroke appeared at her side almost immediately. My dear Duchess, how fascinating to see you and Lord Queensberry together again. One might almost forget the circumstances of your parting. Natalie regarded the woman coolly. I find it best not to dwell on the past, Lady Pembroke. Don't you? Oh, but the past can be so instructive, the woman replied with a full smile, especially when it involves such dramatic circumstances. If you'll excuse me, Natalie said, refusing to take the bait. I believe I need some air. She made her way to the terrace doors, slipping outside into the cool night air. The gardens of Huntington House stretched before her, silver-tinged in the moonlight. She moved to the balustrade, removing her mask and taking a deep breath. Coming back had been a mistake. She had thought herself strong enough to face the gossip, the judgment, to face him. But the pain in Kenton's eyes had shaken her resolve. He believed she had abandoned him. He didn't know the truth. Running away again, Duchess. She turned to find Kenton standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the light from the ballroom. "I needed a moment of peace," she replied. He approached slowly, coming to stand beside her at the balustrade. "Peace has been in short supply since you walked into the ballroom tonight." "For you or for me?" "Both, I imagine." He looked out over the gardens. "Why have you returned, Natalie, after all this time?" She studied his profile, achingly familiar despite the years that had passed. "Because I couldn't stay away any longer," she admitted. "Because there are things you need to know, things everyone needs to know." He turned to her then, his expression guarded. "What things?" "The truth," she said simply, "about Edward's death, about why I left, about," she hesitated, "about us." "There is no us," he said harshly. "You made that clear when you disappeared." Natalie flinched at his tone. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand," he demanded, stepping closer. "Explain why you let me believe we had a future, only to vanish the moment your husband died." The pain in his voice was unbearable. "I couldn't." "Your Grace," interrupted a footman, appearing at the terrace door. "Your carriage is ready." Natalie straightened, gathering her composure like a cloak around her shoulders. "Thank you, I'll be there directly." She turned back to Kenton, whose face had once again become an impassive mask. "This conversation isn't over," she said quietly. "Isn't it?" he asked bitterly. "It seems to me we're exactly where we were 5 years ago, with you walking away." She reached into her reticule and withdrew a small envelope. "Come to Westmoreland House tomorrow at 2 o'clock, she said, pressing it into his hand. "If you truly want answers, you'll find them there." Before he could respond, she replaced her mask and walked back into the ballroom, head held high despite the tears threatening to fall. As her carriage pulled away from Huntington House, Natalie finally allowed herself a moment of weakness, pressing a handkerchief to her lips to stifle a sob. She had known returning to London would be difficult, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of facing Kenton again, for the anger and hurt that radiated from him. He believed she had abandoned him, chosen a life of solitude over a future with him. He didn't know that every day of the past 5 years had been torture, that she had sacrificed their happiness to protect him from a scandal that would have destroyed them both. But tomorrow, if he came, she would tell him everything: the truth about her marriage to Edward, the truth about his death, the truth about the secret she had kept hidden at Westmoreland Park for the past 5 years. A secret that, once revealed, would ensure London society would never recover. The following morning, Natalie sat at her writing desk in the morning room of Westmoreland House, pen poised over a sheet of cream-coloured stationery. The London residence of the Dukes of Westmoreland had stood empty for years, maintained by a skeleton staff until her arrival 2 days ago. Now it felt like a mausoleum, grand, imposing, and utterly devoid of warmth. She had slept poorly, her dreams haunted by Kenton's face, the anger in his eyes, the bitterness in his voice. For 5 years, she had convinced herself that her sacrifice had been necessary, that by disappearing, she had protected him from scandal and ruin. Now she wasn't so certain. "Your Grace," announced the butler from the doorway, "Lady Emmeline Townsend has called." Natalie set down her pen with a sigh. "Show her in, Hargreaves." A moment later, a petite woman with bright eyes and a determined expression swept into the room. At 34, Emmeline Townsend had defied convention by remaining unmarried, devoting herself instead to various charitable causes, and to being Natalie's most steadfast friend. "So it's true," Emmeline declared, removing her gloves with decisive tugs. "You've actually returned to London. When I heard the rumours this morning, I could scarcely believe it." "Good morning to you too, Emma," Natalie replied, rising to embrace her friend. "Don't good morning me," Emmeline scolded, though she returned the embrace warmly. 5 years of exile in the country, and then you appear at the Huntington ball without so much as a note to your oldest friend. "I'm sorry," Natalie said sincerely. "It was," A rather impulsive decision. Impulsive, Emmeline raised an eyebrow. You, who plans everything with military precision, I think not. She seated herself on the sofa, arranging her skirts. Now, tell me the real reason you've emerged from hibernation. Natalie hesitated, then joined her friend on the sofa. I've decided it's time the truth was known. Emmeline's expression grew serious. All of it. Yes, Natalie confirmed. I can't live with the lies anymore, Emma. I've invited Kenton to come here this afternoon. Lord Queensberry, Emmeline looked startled. Are you certain that's wise? Wise, probably not, Natalie admitted, but necessary. He deserves to know everything about Edward, about what really happened that night, she faltered. About Charlotte, Emmeline finished quietly. Natalie nodded, emotion tightening her throat. About Charlotte. And you think he'll come? Emmeline asked gently. I don't know, Natalie confessed. He was so angry last night, Emma. He believes I abandoned him. Because that's exactly what it looked like to the rest of us, her friend pointed out. You disappeared without explanation after Edward's death, cutting off all contact. What was he supposed to think? That I had my reasons, Natalie said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her voice. Men rarely think so rationally when matters of the heart are concerned, Emmeline replied dryly, and Kenton Queensberry less so than most. Natalie rose and moved to the window, looking out at the quiet London street. I did what I thought was right at the time. I know you did, darling, Emmeline said, her tone softening, but you must prepare yourself. 5 years is a long time. Kenton may have changed. He has, Natalie said quietly. I could see it in his eyes last night. There's a hardness there that wasn't before. And yet you still love him, Emmeline observed. Natalie didn't bother to deny it. I never stopped. Then I hope, for your sake, that he comes today. Emmeline rose, crossing to stand beside her friend. And if he doesn't, then perhaps it's time to consider whether Charlotte might be better served by a fresh start, away from London and its memories. You mean leave England? Natalie asked, surprised. Why not? Italy perhaps, or Switzerland, somewhere you could both begin anew without the weight of the past. The idea was seductive in its simplicity, to leave behind the scandal, the whispers, the painful memories. To raise Charlotte somewhere she wouldn't be defined by the circumstances of her birth. I can't run forever, Natalie said finally. Charlotte deserves to know her heritage, her true identity. And what of her father? Emmeline asked quietly. Does she not deserve to know him as well? Before Natalie could respond, the butler appeared at the door once more. Your Grace, a letter has arrived for you by messenger. He presented the missive on a silver salver. Natalie recognized the handwriting immediately, her heart leaping into her throat as she broke the seal. It's from Kenton, she said, unfolding the single sheet. Her eyes scanned the brief message, and she felt her heart sink. He says he cannot come today, that he has pressing business that cannot be postponed. Emmeline touched her arm sympathetically. I'm sorry, Natalie. He says he will call tomorrow instead, Natalie continued, a small flicker of hope rekindling. At the same time. Well, that's something at least, Emmeline said encouragingly. It shows he's willing to hear you out despite his anger. Or perhaps he simply wants the satisfaction of refusing my explanations in person, Natalie replied, refolding the letter. That doesn't sound like the Kenton Queensberry I remember, Emmeline objected. The Kenton Queensberry you remember no longer exists, Natalie said sadly, just as the Natalie Harrington he knew is gone as well. Not gone, Emmeline corrected gently. Simply changed by circumstance, as we all are. The rest of the day passed in a haze of nervous anticipation. Natalie found herself unable to settle to any task, pacing the rooms of Westmoreland House like a caged animal. By evening, she had resolved to visit Surrey the following morning before Kenton's scheduled arrival. She needed to see Charlotte, to draw strength from her daughter's innocent face before confronting the past. The carriage departed at dawn, carrying her away from London's foggy streets toward the rolling countryside of Surrey. Westmoreland Park stood nestled amid ancient oaks, its honey-coloured stone gleaming in the morning light. As the carriage rolled up the drive, Natalie felt the tension in her shoulders ease for the first time since her return to London. This was home, not the grand, empty mansion in Mayfair, but this place where she had found peace amid sorrow, where she had watched her daughter grow. "Mama!" came an excited cry as she descended from the carriage. A small figure in a blue pinafore came racing across the lawn, golden curls bouncing with each step. Natalie knelt, opening her arms just in time to catch the child in a fierce embrace. "Charlotte, my darling," she murmured, breathing in the sweet scent of her daughter's hair. "How I've missed you." "Did you see the Queen?" the child asked eagerly, pulling back to study her mother's face. "Miss Trent said you might see the Queen in London." Natalie laughed, rising to her feet while keeping hold of Charlotte's hand. "No, sweetheart, I didn't see the Queen, but I did attend a grand ball." "With dancing?" Charlotte asked, her blue eyes wide with fascination. At 4 years old, she found the concept of balls and dancing endlessly entertaining. "Yes, with dancing," Natalie confirmed as they walked toward the house, "and music, and many people in fine clothes." "Did you wear your emerald necklace, the one that was grandmother's?" "I did," Natalie replied, touched by her daughter's memory. "Were you the most beautiful lady there?" Charlotte asked with the absolute confidence of a child in her mother's perfection. Natalie smiled, squeezing the small hand in hers. "I doubt that very much, my love." They entered the house to find Miss Trent, Charlotte's governess, waiting in the entrance hall. "Your Grace," she greeted with a curtsy, "we weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "A change of plans," Natalie explained. "I needed to see Charlotte before I attend to some important business in London tomorrow." Miss Trent's eyes, kind and perceptive, studied her face. "Of course, Your Grace. Charlotte has been very well behaved during your absence." "Except when I spilled paint on the nursery rug," Charlotte piped up honestly. Natalie laughed, some of the weight lifting from her heart. "Well, I hope you apologized properly." "I did," Charlotte assured her solemnly, "and I helped Mrs. Perkins clean it up." "That's my good girl," Natalie said warmly. "Now, what shall we do with our day together? A picnic, perhaps? Or a ride on your pony?" "Both," Charlotte exclaimed, jumping with excitement. "Both it is, then," Natalie agreed, unable to deny her daughter anything after their separation. The day passed in a golden haze of happiness, riding across the estate with Charlotte on her pony, picnicking beside the stream where wildflowers grew in abundance, reading stories in the nursery as afternoon turned to evening. Each moment was precious, a reminder of why Natalie had made the choices she had. As she tucked Charlotte into bed that night, the child's eyes heavy with sleep, Natalie felt a surge of fierce protectiveness. "Mama," Charlotte murmured drowsily, "will you be here when I wake up?" Natalie brushed a curl from her daughter's forehead. "No, my darling, I must return to London very early. But I'll be back again soon, I promise." "Can I come to London too?" Charlotte asked, fighting to keep her eyes open. Natalie hesitated. Perhaps someday soon. Would you like that?" Charlotte nodded sleepily. "I want to see the palace and the dancing." "Then we shall arrange it," Natalie promised, bending to kiss her daughter's forehead. "Sleep now, my love." She remained until Charlotte's breathing deepened into sleep, then quietly left the nursery. In her own chambers, she sat at her dressing table, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Tomorrow, she would tell Kenton everything, about her loveless marriage to Edward, about his cruelty behind closed doors, about his threats when he discovered her affair with Kenton, about the night he had died, not in a riding accident as the official story claimed, but in a confrontation that had turned violent when Natalie had finally found the courage to leave him. And most importantly, about Charlotte, the daughter Kenton didn't know existed. The child who had his eyes, his smile, his gentle nature, the scandal would be enormous. The forgotten Duchess, revealed as an adulteress. The late Duke of Westmoreland, exposed as a monster. Lord Kenton Queensberry, named as the father of a child born while the Duchess was still married to another man. London society would never recover from such revelations. But Natalie was tired of living in the shadows, tired of denying her daughter her rightful connection to her father. Whatever the cost, the truth would be told. With that resolution firm in her mind, she instructed her lady's maid to pack for their return to London. By dawn, she was once again in her carriage, leaving behind the peaceful sanctuary of Westmoreland Park for the uncertainties that awaited her in the city. Westmoreland House stood silent and imposing in the afternoon light, its windows reflecting the weak April sunshine. Kenton Queensberry hesitated at the wrought iron gates, fighting the urge to turn back, to protect himself from whatever painful truths Natalie wished to reveal. For 5 years, he had nursed his anger like a wounded animal, allowing it to fester until it became a part of him, a shield against the pain of her abandonment. He had thrown himself into his work, expanding his shipping business until it rivaled the great merchant houses of London. He had travelled extensively, seeking in foreign lands what he could not find at home, peace. And now, with a simple note, Natalie had summoned him back into her orbit, and he had come, against his better judgment, against the advice of friends, against the protective walls he had built around his heart. The butler admitted him with formal courtesy, leading him through the familiar entrance hall to the blue drawing room where he and Natalie had once spent countless hours together, when he had called on her as a family friend during her marriage to Edward. The room was unchanged, the same delicate Sheraton furniture, the same Chinese porcelain adorning the mantel, the same view of the small garden beyond the French doors. It was as though time had stood still within these walls, preserving the setting of their forbidden romance. "Lord Queensberry," came Natalie's voice from the doorway. He turned, and for a moment could not speak. She wore a simple day dress of deep burgundy, her dark hair arranged in a less elaborate style than at the ball. Without the mask, without the surrounding crowd, she seemed both more vulnerable and more beautiful than he remembered. "Duchess," he replied formally, bowing slightly. She entered the room, closing the door behind her. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't certain you would." "Neither was I," he admitted, remaining standing as she took a seat on the sofa. "Please," she gestured to the armchair opposite her. "This may be a lengthy conversation." Reluctantly, he sat, maintaining a rigid posture that reflected his guarded emotional state. "You said you wished to tell me the truth. About Edward's death, about why you left." "Yes," she confirmed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "But first, I need to ask you something." "What is that?" he asked warily. "Did you receive my letters?" "The ones I sent after the first." Kenton frowned. "What letters?" "I received one note 2 weeks after Edward's funeral saying you needed time away from London. Nothing more." A look of pain crossed her face. "I wrote to you nearly every week for 6 months," she said quietly. "When you never replied, I assumed you had read them and wanted nothing more to do with me." "I received nothing," he insisted, confusion replacing some of his anger. "Not one letter beyond that first note." She closed her eyes briefly. "Then Edward succeeded beyond the grave. He must have given instructions to intercept any correspondence between us." "That's a convenient explanation," Kenton said, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. "But true nonetheless," she replied, meeting his gaze directly. "Just as it's true that my husband was not the man London society believed him to be." "What do you mean?" Natalie took a deep breath. "Edward was cruel, Kenton. Not in ways that left visible marks. He was too clever for that. But in ways that broke me down piece by piece, day by day." Kenton felt his jaw tighten. "He hurt you." "Emotionally, primarily. Occasionally physically, though never where anyone might see. She spoke matter-of-factly, as though discussing the weather rather than years of abuse. Our marriage was arranged, as you know. My father was in debt. Edward needed a wife from a good family. It was a transaction, nothing more. I knew you weren't happy, Kenton said quietly. I didn't know he mistreated you. I became adept at hiding it, she replied, as most women in my position do. In public, we were the perfect ducal couple. In private, she shuddered slightly. In private, he was a different man entirely. Why didn't you tell me? Kenton asked, leaning forward. When he faltered, unwilling to name what had been between them. When we fell in love, she finished for him, because I was ashamed, because I thought I could endure it. Because I feared what he might do if I tried to leave him. She looked down at her hands. And then, when we began our affair, I was happy for the first time in years. I didn't want to taint that happiness with the ugliness of my marriage. Kenton rose, moving to the window to stare out at the garden, his thoughts in turmoil. He had suspected Edward was not a kind husband, but the extent of his cruelty had been hidden from him, from everyone. What happened the night he died? He asked finally, turning back to face her. Natalie's expression grew distant, as though she were looking back through time to that fateful evening. He discovered our affair, not through any carelessness on our part, but because he had been having me followed. He had suspected for months, it seemed. Kenton felt his blood run cold. What did he do? He confronted me after dinner. He had been drinking heavily, and his anger was, she swallowed. He said he would ruin you. That he had friends in government who would ensure your business contracts were cancelled, that you would be ostracized from society, that you might even face criminal charges. For what, loving you? Kenton asked incredulously. For adultery with a duchess, she corrected. In certain circles, that would have been enough. But more than that, he threatened to spread rumors that you had embezzled funds from mutual business associates, that you had engaged in fraud. He said he had already prepared documents that would convince any court. Kenton's mind raced back to that time, remembering certain business associates who had suddenly become cool toward him, certain opportunities that had mysteriously evaporated. He was already beginning his campaign against you, Natalie continued. That night, I told him I was leaving him regardless of his threats. He became enraged, violent. He struck me, knocked me to the ground. She spoke calmly, but Kenton could see her hands trembling. I had never fought back before, but this time I did. There was a heavy candlestick nearby. I grabbed it, not to strike him, but to defend myself if he came at me again. The room seemed to grow quieter, the very air stilling as she continued. He lunged for me, and I raised the candlestick, but he was drunk, unsteady. He tripped on the carpet and fell forward just as I lifted it. The corner struck his temple with far more force than I had intended. She drew a shaky breath. He died almost instantly. Kenton stared at her, his mind struggling to process her words. It was self-defense, he said finally. Yes, she agreed, but who would have believed me? The devoted Duchess, having an affair, suddenly claiming her husband was abusive when he turned up dead. The scandal would have been enormous. You would have been implicated, your reputation destroyed along with mine. So you concocted the riding accident, he said, beginning to understand. His valet helped me, she admitted. James had seen Edward's cruelty firsthand over the years. He helped me move the body to the stables, arranged it to look as though he had been kicked in the head by his horse. Given Edward's reputation as a reckless rider, no one questioned it. And then you fled to the country, Kenton concluded. To grieve publicly, yes, she said, but also because I discovered something else that night, something I had suspected but hadn't confirmed until the day of Edward's funeral. She rose, moving to stand before him, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent of her perfume. I was with child Kenton, your child. The words hung in the air between them, impossible and yet undeniable. He began, unable to complete the thought. Yes, she said softly, our daughter. Charlotte Elizabeth Harrington, born 7 months after Edward's death, but small enough that no one who saw her questioned the timeline. Kenton felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath his feet. A child, his child, a daughter he had never known existed. "How old?" he managed to ask. "She turned 4 in January," Natalie replied. "She has your eyes. And your smile." Kenton turned away, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was telling him. For 5 years, he had believed himself abandoned, betrayed by the woman he loved. Now he learned that she had been protecting him, protecting their child, from a scandal that would have destroyed them all. "Why tell me now?" he asked hoarsely. "After all this time, why reveal the truth?" Natalie moved to stand beside him at the window. "Because Charlotte deserves to know her father. Because I'm tired of living a lie. Because," she hesitated, then continued with quiet intensity, "because despite everything, I never stopped loving you." He turned to look at her, really look at her, seeing beyond his anger to the woman he had once known better than anyone in the world. The woman who had sacrificed everything to protect those she loved. "Where is she?" he asked. "Charlotte, where is our daughter?" "At Westmoreland Park," Natalie replied, "with her governess. I saw her yesterday, before returning to London." "What have you told her about her father?" "That he was a good man who would have loved her very much had he known her," Natalie said simply. "And does she believe her father to be Edward?" "She knows only that her father is not with us. She's still too young to understand the complexities." Kenton ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing with the implications of all he had learned. "You realize what will happen if the truth comes out, about Edward's death, about Charlotte's parentage. The scandal would be unprecedented." "I know," Natalie acknowledged, "but I've lived with secrets for too long, Kenton. I'm not suggesting we announce everything to the world, but I cannot continue to keep you from your daughter." "And us?" he asked, the question that had lain beneath all others finally surfacing. "What of us, Natalie?" She looked up at him, vulnerability evident in her dark eyes. "That depends on whether you can forgive me for the choices I made. For keeping Charlotte from you, for the years we've lost." Kenton reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. The simple contact sent a jolt of recognition through him. This was Natalie, his Natalie, returned to him after years of absence. "I need time," he said honestly, "to process everything you've told me, to consider what it means for the future." "I understand," she replied, though he could see the disappointment she tried to hide. "But I want to meet her," he continued. "Charlotte, my daughter, our daughter." A smile broke across Natalie's face, transforming her features with a radiance he remembered all too well. "Yes, of course. We could travel to Surrey tomorrow, if you wish." "I do wish it," he said firmly, "more than anything." They stood in silence for a moment, their hands still joined, the truth finally laid bare between them. The anger that had sustained Kenton for 5 years was fading, replaced by a complex mixture of emotions he could not yet fully comprehend. "There's more we need to discuss," Natalie said finally. "Plans that must be made. But perhaps that can wait until tomorrow." Kenton nodded, reluctantly releasing her hand. "Tomorrow, then, I'll call for you at 9, and we can take my carriage to Surrey." As he prepared to leave, a thought occurred to him. "Natalie, you said you wrote to me for 6 months after Edward's death. What did the letters say?" Her expression softened. "They said that I loved you, that I was sorry for leaving without a proper explanation. That there were circumstances I couldn't yet reveal, but that I prayed you would wait for me, trust me. And when I didn't respond, I believed you had given up on me," she said simply. "As I would have given up on myself, in your position." Kenton felt a renewed surge of anger, not at Natalie this time, but at Edward, whose malice had extended beyond the grave to separate them for 5 long years. "I would have waited," he said quietly. "Had I received even one of those letters, I would have waited forever." With those words hanging between them, he bowed formally and took his leave, his mind and heart full of all he had learned, and all that might yet be possible. The carriage journey to Surrey passed in a curious mixture of tension and anticipation. Seated across from Kenton, Natalie found herself studying his profile as he gazed out at the passing countryside, noting the changes 5 years had wrought. There were new lines at the corners of his eyes, a certain sternness to his mouth that hadn't been there before. Yet when he turned to catch her watching him, the smile that briefly touched his lips was achingly familiar. "Tell me about her," he said, as they passed through a small village. "About Charlotte." Natalie's face softened at the mention of their daughter. She's spirited, curious about everything. She loves stories, the more adventurous, the better. She has a pony named Cinnamon that she adores, though she's only just learning to ride properly. "Does she look like you?" Kenton asked. "Some say so, around the chin and mouth perhaps. But her eyes are yours, that particular shade of blue, and her hair is fairer than mine, more golden." "Is she happy?" The question held a wealth of emotion. "Yes," Natalie assured him. "Despite everything, she's a very happy child. I've made certain of that." They lapsed into silence again, each lost in private thoughts. As the carriage turned onto the long drive leading to Westmoreland Park, Natalie felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. How would Charlotte react to this stranger? How would Kenton respond to the child he had never known? The carriage had barely stopped when Charlotte came bounding out of the house, her pinafore fluttering in the breeze. "Mamma, you came back," she cried, rushing toward them. Natalie descended quickly, gathering her daughter into her arms. "As I promised I would," she said, pressing a kiss to the child's forehead. Charlotte's attention was already shifting to the tall figure emerging from the carriage behind her mother. "Who is that?" she asked with a child's direct curiosity. Natalie turned, still holding Charlotte's hand. "This is Lord Queensberry," she said carefully. "He is a very dear friend who has come to visit us." Kenton approached slowly, his expression a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. He crouched down to Charlotte's level, his eyes drinking in every detail of her face. "Hello, Charlotte," he said, his voice slightly unsteady. "I'm very pleased to meet you." Charlotte studied him with solemn blue eyes, his eyes, Natalie realized with a pang. "Are you Mamma's friend from London?" she asked. "I am," Kenton confirmed. "I've known your mother for many years." "Did you dance with her at the ball?" Charlotte inquired, revealing that she had been thinking about this mysterious event since Natalie's last visit. A ghost of a smile touched Kenton's lips. "I did, yes." "Mamma says I'm too small to go to balls," Charlotte informed him seriously. "But when I'm bigger, I shall wear a beautiful dress and dance all night long." "I have no doubt of it," Kenton replied, his voice warm with suppressed emotion. "Charlotte," Natalie interjected gently, "why don't you show Lord Queensberry the new swing that Mr. Jenkins hung from the oak tree?" The child's face lit up. "Oh, yes. It goes ever so high." She held out her small hand to Kenton without hesitation. "Come see." After a moment's pause, Kenton took the offered hand, rising to his feet. The sight of his large hand, engulfing their daughter's tiny one, brought tears to Natalie's eyes that she quickly blinked away. She watched as Charlotte led Kenton across the lawn toward the ancient oak, where a wooden swing hung from a sturdy branch. With the natural adaptability of children, Charlotte seemed to have accepted this stranger's presence without question, chattering away as though they were old friends. Miss Trent appeared at Natalie's side, her expression curious. "Your Grace, I wasn't expecting you back so soon." "A change of plans," Natalie explained, not taking her eyes off the pair by the swing. "And the gentleman?" the governess inquired cautiously. Natalie hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "Lord Queensberry is someone very important to me, to us." Miss Trent, ever perceptive, seemed to understand what remained unsaid. "I see," she murmured. "Shall I have refreshments prepared in the garden? It's a lovely day." "Yes, thank you," Natalie replied gratefully. We'll be staying the night. Lord Queensberry can use the blue guest room." As the governess departed to make the arrangements, Natalie slowly walked toward the swing, where Kenton was now pushing Charlotte gently back and forth, her delighted laughter carrying on the spring breeze. "Higher," Charlotte commanded. "I want to touch the clouds." "Perhaps not quite that high," Kenton replied with a chuckle. "Your mother might not approve." "Mama says I'm brave," Charlotte informed him. "Braver than most girls my age." "I believe that completely," Kenton said, his eyes meeting Natalie's as she approached. The three of them spent the afternoon together, first with the swing, then exploring the gardens where Charlotte proudly pointed out the flowers she had helped to plant, and finally with a picnic beneath the oak tree, where Charlotte regaled them with elaborate stories of her own invention, featuring princesses who rescued themselves and dragons who were simply misunderstood. As the day progressed, Natalie watched Kenton gradually relax, his initial awkwardness giving way to genuine delight in his daughter's company. He listened to her stories with rapt attention, answered her endless questions with patience, and looked at her with such tenderness that Natalie felt her heart constrict. When Charlotte finally began to tire, the excitement of the day catching up with her, Kenton carried her back to the house on his shoulders, her small hands gripping his hair for balance as she giggled at her new perspective on the world. After dinner, Natalie took Charlotte upstairs for her bedtime routine, leaving Kenton to wait in the library. When she returned an hour later, she found him standing before the fireplace, staring into the flames. "She's asleep," he asked, turning at the sound of her entrance. "Finally," Natalie confirmed with a smile. "She was so excited by your visit that she insisted on 2 stories before she would close her eyes." Kenton's expression grew serious. "She's extraordinary, Natalie. Absolutely extraordinary." "Yes," she agreed softly, "she is." "When I look at her," he began, then faltered, "when I think of all I've missed." "I know," Natalie said, moving to stand beside him. "And I'm so sorry for that. If I could change the past." "No," he interrupted, turning to face her fully. "No, I understand now why you did what you did. You were protecting her, protecting both of us." "But at such cost," she whispered. 5 years, Kenton. 5 years we can never recover." He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture so familiar it made her breath catch. "Perhaps not, but we have now." "And the future." "Do we," she asked, hardly daring to hope. "Have a future, I mean." "I believe we do," he said quietly, "if that's what you want." "It's all I've ever wanted," she admitted. "But the complications—" "Will be managed," he interrupted firmly. "Somehow we will find a way forward. Together this time." The conviction in his voice, the certainty in his eyes, broke through the last of Natalie's reservations. She stepped into his embrace, feeling his arms close around her with a sense of rightness that brought tears to her eyes. "I never stopped loving you," she murmured against his chest. "Not for a single day." "Nor I you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Even in my anger, even when I thought you had abandoned me, I loved you still." He tilted her face up to his, and then he was kissing her, 5 years of separation dissolving in the perfect meeting of lips and hearts. It was a kiss of reunion, of forgiveness, of promise, and when they finally broke apart, they were both smiling through tears. "What now?" Natalie asked, her hands still resting against his chest. "Where do we go from here?" Kenton took her hands in his. "First, I believe we need to stay here for a few days. I have a daughter to become acquainted with." "And then we return to London," he said decisively, "together. We face whatever comes our way, the gossip, the speculation, the scandal together." "And Charlotte?" Natalie asked, her primary concern always for their daughter. "Charlotte remains here until we've weathered the initial storm," Kenton said thoughtfully. "Once things have settled, we bring her to London. Not as the Duchess of Westmoreland's mysterious ward, as I imagine you planned, but as our daughter. The scandal will be enormous," Natalie warned. The Ton will never accept a child born of adultery. Some won't, Kenton agreed, but others will follow our lead, and in time the scandal will fade, as all scandals do. Charlotte will have both her parents, and that's what matters most. And us, Natalie asked, the question that lay at the heart of everything. What of us, Kenton? He smiled, bringing her hands to his lips. I believe, Duchess, that you and I have a wedding to plan. 2 weeks later, Natalie stood at the window of her bedroom in Westmoreland House, watching the early morning fog drift through the London streets. The past fortnight had been a whirlwind of emotion and planning, of reunions and revelations, of joy tinged with the anxiety of what was to come. She and Kenton had spent several idyllic days at Westmoreland Park, where he had formed a bond with Charlotte that brought tears to Natalie's eyes each time she witnessed their interactions. Her daughter had accepted this new presence in her life with the easy adaptability of childhood, quickly growing attached to the man who listened to her stories with such attention, who answered her endless questions with patience, who looked at her mother with such obvious love. They had not yet told Charlotte the truth of her parentage. That conversation would come later, when she was old enough to understand. For now, it was enough that Kenton was a beloved friend, a constant visitor, someone who made her mother smile in a way she had never seen before. Their return to London had been carefully orchestrated. They had travelled separately, maintaining the appearance of mere acquaintances reunited after a long absence. But behind closed doors, they had begun to plan their future together. Today would mark the first step in that future, a small dinner party at Westmoreland House, where they would begin to reintegrate into society as a couple. The guest list had been carefully curated. Lord and Lady Fairchild, longtime supporters of Natalie, Lady Emmeline Townsend, her most steadfast friend, Lord and Lady Pembroke, whose influence in society was considerable, and several other key figures whose acceptance would pave the way for others to follow. Your Grace, came the voice of her lady's maid, Lord Queensberry has arrived. Natalie turned from the window, her heart quickening at the news, despite the fact that she had been expecting him. Thank you, Morris. I'll be down directly. She gave herself a final assessment in the mirror. The deep green silk of her gown complemented her dark hair and fair skin, while the modest cut maintained the propriety expected of a widow while still suggesting a woman ready to re-enter society. Around her neck hung the emerald pendant that had been her grandmother's, a talisman of sorts, connecting her to a past before scandal and secrecy had shadowed her life. Descending the stairs, she found Kenton waiting in the entrance hall, handsome in evening attire, his expression warming as he caught sight of her. Duchess, he greeted formally, bowing over her hand as a footman looked on. You look ravishing. Lord Queensberry, she replied with equal formality, though her eyes conveyed a more intimate message. Thank you for arriving early to discuss the business matter I mentioned. It was a pretense, of course, a reason for them to speak privately before the other guests arrived. The footman discreetly withdrew as Kenton offered his arm, escorting her to the library where they could converse without observation. Once the door closed behind them, his formality vanished. You're beautiful, he said, drawing her into his arms for a brief but heartfelt kiss. Absolutely beautiful. Natalie smiled against his lips. You're rather handsome yourself, my lord. He released her reluctantly, moving to pour them each a small glass of sherry from the decanter on the sideboard. Are you ready for this? He asked, handing her one of the glasses. As ready as I'll ever be, she replied honestly. Though I must admit to some trepidation, it's been 5 years since I hosted a dinner party. You'll be magnificent, he assured her. And remember, these are carefully chosen guests. Friends and allies, not adversaries. Even so, she said, taking a sip of sherry to steady her nerves. This is only the beginning. The real test will come later when we announce our engagement. One step at a time, Kenton counseled. Tonight is simply about re-establishing your presence in society, with me at your side as a friend, a particularly devoted friend, perhaps, but nothing more definitive. Natalie nodded, grateful for his steady presence. In the 2 weeks since their reunion, he had been her rock, her confidant, her partner in planning their future. They had discussed every aspect of their situation, the legal implications of Charlotte's status, the potential scandal of their relationship, the practical considerations of merging their lives after so much time apart. "I received a letter from Charlotte today," she said, moving to her desk and retrieving a folded paper covered in a child's uneven handwriting. Miss Trent helped her with it, of course, but the sentiments are her own. Kenton took the letter, a tender smile spreading across his face as he read their daughter's words. A charming account of her pony's latest adventures, a description of the butterflies she had seen in the garden, and a rather lengthy explanation of why she should be allowed to stay up later than her current bedtime. "She ends by asking when Lord Queensberry will visit again," he noted, his smile widening at the misspelling of his name. "She's quite taken with you," Natalie observed softly. "The feeling is entirely mutual," he replied, carefully refolding the letter. "I find myself thinking of her constantly, wondering what she's doing, what new ideas are filling that remarkable mind of hers." "That's what it is to be a parent," Natalie said. "They're never truly absent from your thoughts, even when they're not with you." The sound of the doorbell interrupted their conversation, signaling the arrival of their first guests. "It begins," Kenton said, offering her his arm once more. "Shall we, Duchess?" Natalie took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and placed her hand on his arm. "Yes, my lord, I believe we shall." The dinner party progressed better than Natalie had dared to hope. Lady Emmeline arrived first, giving Natalie a reassuring squeeze of the hand before greeting Kenton with friendly warmth. Lord and Lady Fairchild followed, then the Pembrokes, and finally the remaining guests, all of whom expressed delight at the Duchess's return to society. "We've missed your presence these past years, Your Grace," Lady Pembroke commented as they assembled in the drawing-room before dinner. "London has been decidedly duller without you." "You're too kind," Natalie replied, aware of the curiosity lurking behind the woman's pleasant expression. "I found the quiet of the country beneficial after my loss, but I admit to missing certain aspects of city life." "And certain people, perhaps," Lady Pembroke suggested, her gaze flicking meaningfully to where Kenton stood conversing with Lord Fairchild. Natalie maintained her composure, neither confirming nor denying the implied question. "I've been fortunate to reconnect with many dear friends since my return." The dinner itself was a masterpiece of subtle signaling. Kenton sat at the opposite end of the table from Natalie, as protocol demanded, but their interaction throughout the meal, the shared glances, the way they naturally included each other in conversation, spoke volumes to the observant. By the time the gentlemen rejoined the ladies for coffee, the mood in the room had shifted from polite curiosity to warm acceptance. "I must say," Lord Fairchild commented quietly to Natalie as the evening drew to a close, "it does my heart good to see you and Queensberry together again." "Even as friends," he added with a knowing smile. "Thank you, Edmund," she replied, touched by his support. "Your friendship has meant more than I can express." "Well, my dear, prepare yourself," he warned good-naturedly. "Lydia Pembroke has already whispered to my wife that she intends to host a small musical evening next week and hopes you and Lord Queensberry will both attend." The reintegration of the forgotten Duchess has officially begun. After the last guest had departed, Natalie and Kenton stood alone in the entrance hall, a comfortable silence settling between them. "That went well," he observed, his hand finding hers in the dim light. "Better than I expected," she agreed, though Lady Pembroke was fishing quite determinedly for confirmation of our relationship. "Let her fish," Kenton said with a chuckle. "For now, let them all speculate. It will make the truth, when it comes, less of a shock." Natalie leaned against him, suddenly weary now that the tension of the evening had passed. "When do we tell them?" About us, about Charlotte. Soon, he promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. But not too soon. We need to establish ourselves as a couple in their minds first, before we introduce the more complicated aspects of our history. They moved to the library, where a small fire still burned in the grate despite the mild spring evening. Seated side by side on the sofa, they discussed the nuances of the dinner party, who had seemed most supportive, who might require more careful handling, what invitations they could expect to follow. It's strange, Natalie mused, her head resting against Kenton's shoulder. 5 years I spent in isolation, dreading the thought of facing society again. Now, with you beside me, it seems almost manageable. More than manageable, he corrected gently. We will not merely survive this re-entry, Natalie, we will thrive together. She turned her face up to his, struck once again by the miracle of their reunion. I love you, she said simply. And I love you, he replied, bending to capture her lips in a kiss that promised a lifetime of such moments to come. As Kenton took his leave, propriety still demanded he not spend the night, not until their relationship was formalized. Natalie felt a sense of peace settle over her that had been absent for far too long. The road ahead would not be easy, but with Kenton at her side, with Charlotte's future secure, she was ready to face whatever challenges awaited. The forgotten Duchess, it seemed, was forgotten no more. In the weeks that followed, Natalie and Kenton executed their carefully orchestrated re-entry into society with precision and patience. They appeared together at select gatherings, a musical evening at the Pembrokes, a small dinner at Lord Fairchild's, a charity exhibition at the Royal Academy. Each appearance was calculated to gradually accustom the ton to seeing them as a pair, while maintaining the fiction that they were merely old friends reconnecting after years apart. Behind closed doors, they continued to plan their future. Kenton made frequent visits to Surrey, where his bond with Charlotte deepened with each encounter. Natalie watched with joy as their daughter blossomed under the attention of both parents, though Charlotte still did not know the truth of her relationship to the kind gentleman who brought her gifts and told her exciting stories of his travels. By the time June arrived, bringing with it the height of the London season, whispers about the Duchess of Westmoreland and Lord Queensberry had evolved from speculation to assumption. They had been seen riding together in the park, attending the theatre, conversing intently at various social functions. Society had drawn its own conclusions, and for the most part, those conclusions were favourable. Lady Huntington asked me directly if we were to expect an announcement soon, Emmeline reported during one of her regular visits to Westmoreland House. I believe she was referring to a betrothal, though I maintained an air of innocent confusion. Natalie smiled, pouring tea for her friend. And what did you tell her? That I couldn't possibly comment on your private affairs, Emmeline replied with a mischievous grin, which she took as confirmation naturally. Naturally, Natalie agreed. The ton sees what it wishes to see. And in this case, what they're seeing is the truth, or close to it, Emmeline pointed out. You and Kenton are clearly besotted with each other. The only fiction is the timeline. Speaking of which, Natalie said, setting down her teacup, Kenton and I have been discussing when to make our formal announcement. Emmeline leaned forward eagerly. And we're thinking of hosting a small garden party here next week, Natalie explained. Nothing too elaborate, just 30 or 40 of our closest friends and allies. Kenton will officially ask for my hand, I will accept, and we'll announce our engagement to the assembled company. Perfect, Emmeline approved. A private setting, controlled guest list, and the narrative firmly in your hands. And Charlotte. When do you plan to introduce her to society? Not immediately, Natalie said, a shadow crossing her face. We'll wait until the initial furor over our engagement has died down. Then we'll bring her to London, perhaps in the autumn when the season is over and society is less concentrated. A wise decision, Emmeline agreed. And have you decided what you'll tell people about her parentage? Natalie sighed, the one cloud in her otherwise brightening sky. We are still discussing it. The safest approach would be to maintain the fiction that she is Edward's child, born after his death. But you don't want to deny Kenton's paternity, Emmeline finished for her. Exactly. It feels wrong, after all we've been through, to perpetuate that lie. And yet, to acknowledge the truth would mean admitting to adultery during my marriage, which, while hardly unprecedented among the aristocracy, would create a scandal, Emmeline acknowledged. Not just a scandal, Natalie corrected. It would potentially affect Charlotte's legal status, her position in society, perhaps even her future prospects. Emmeline reached across to squeeze her friend's hand. You'll find the right path, darling, you and Kenton together. I hope so, Natalie replied, returning the pressure of her friend's hand. For Charlotte's sake, if nothing else. The garden party was set for the following Thursday, invitations dispatched to a carefully selected guest list of 40 individuals whose support would be crucial in the coming months. Natalie threw herself into the preparations with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This would be her first major social event as hostess since her return to London, and it would mark a turning point in her life, the public acknowledgement of her love for Kenton, the first step toward their new life together. The morning of the garden party dawned clear and warm, a perfect June day that seemed to bode well for the occasion. Natalie supervised the final arrangements, the positioning of small tables and chairs throughout the garden, the preparation of champagne and refreshments, the arrangement of flowers cut fresh from the conservatory. Kenton arrived early, as they had planned, to review the final details before the guests arrived. Everything looks perfect, he assured her, taking in the transformed garden with appreciation. As do you. Natalie smoothed the skirt of her pale blue day dress, chosen specifically for the occasion. Thank you, though I must confess to some nerves. Perfectly natural, he said, taking her hands in his. But remember, this is a happy occasion. We're announcing our love, our future together. Whatever comes after, we face it with that foundation. She nodded, drawing strength from his confidence. You're right, of course. It's just that we've planned this moment for so long, and now that it's here. Now that it's here, we'll enjoy every moment, he finished for her, starting with this one. He drew her into his arms, kissing her with a tenderness that calmed her racing heart. When they separated, Natalie felt her resolve strengthening. This was right. This was where they were meant to be. The guests began to arrive at 2 o'clock, greeted by Natalie and Kenton at the entrance to the garden. Lady Emmeline, the Fairchilds, the Pembrokes, and others whose support had been instrumental in their reintegration into society. By 2:30, the garden was filled with well-dressed men and women, the air alive with conversation and laughter. At 3, as planned, Kenton tapped a spoon against his champagne glass, calling for attention. A hush fell over the gathering as all eyes turned to where he and Natalie stood beneath an arbor covered in climbing roses. My friends, he began, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet garden. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Your presence means more than you can know, particularly to Her Grace, who has too long been absent from the society that values her so highly. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Many of you have known me for years, Kenton continued, and some of you may recall that before her marriage to the late Duke, the then Lady Natalie Harrington and I were close friends. Knowing smiles appeared on several faces at this diplomatic phrasing. Circumstances separated us, he went on, as circumstances sometimes do, but fate has given us a second chance, a chance I intend to grasp with both hands. He turned to Natalie, taking her hands in his eyes filled with a love so evident that several of the ladies present sighed audibly. Natalie, he said, his voice dropping slightly though still audible to their rapt audience. 5 years ago, I lost you. I have spent every day since then regretting what might have been. Now that you have returned to my life, I cannot imagine letting another day pass without asking you to share your future with mine." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, as a collective gasp rose from the onlookers. "Natalie Harrington, Duchess of Westmoreland," he said formally, "would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" Though they had rehearsed this moment, had planned every word and gesture, Natalie found herself genuinely moved by the emotion in Kenton's eyes, by the sincerity in his voice. Tears sprang to her eyes as she smiled down at him. "Yes, Kenton," she replied, her voice clear despite the emotion tightening her throat. "With all my heart, yes." He rose, slipping a diamond ring onto her finger before drawing her into an embrace that, while properly restrained for their audience, left no doubt as to the depth of their feelings. Applause erupted around them, followed quickly by a surge of well-wishers offering congratulations. Lady Pembroke was among the first to reach them, her eyes suspiciously damp. "I knew it," she declared triumphantly. "From the moment I saw you together at the Huntington ball, I said to my husband, there's a love story being rekindled before our very eyes." Lord Fairchild clasped Kenton's hand warmly. "Congratulations, old friend. You've waited long enough for this day." Lady Emmeline embraced Natalie tightly. "Perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." For the next hour, Natalie and Kenton accepted congratulations and good wishes from their guests, the atmosphere one of genuine celebration. If there were any present who disapproved of the match, they kept their reservations to themselves, carried along by the tide of goodwill that surrounded the newly engaged couple. As the party began to wind down, Lord Pembroke raised his glass in a final toast. "To the Duchess and Lord Queensberry," he proclaimed. "May their future together be as bright as their obvious devotion to one another." "Hear, hear," came the response from the assembled guests. By 5 o'clock, the last of the guests had departed, leaving Natalie and Kenton alone in the garden, surrounded by the remnants of the celebration, empty champagne glasses, scattered rose petals, the lingering echo of congratulations. "Well," Kenton said, drawing Natalie close, "I believe that went rather well." "Better than I dared hope," she agreed, leaning against him contentedly. "They seemed genuinely happy for us." "Of course they were," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "It's a love story, after all, and who doesn't love a happy ending?" "It's not quite the ending yet," she reminded him, glancing down at the diamond ring that now adorned her finger. "We still have a wedding to plan. And Charlotte to consider." "True," he acknowledged, "but today was a significant step. The Ton now knows of our engagement. The gossips will spread the news to every corner of London by tomorrow. And when the inevitable questions arise about our past, about the timing of our reunion, we'll face them together," Natalie finished for him, "as we've agreed." They had indeed agreed on a strategy. They would acknowledge that they had been friends before Natalie's marriage to Edward, would admit to having harbored feelings for each other that circumstances had prevented them from pursuing. They would explain Natalie's 5-year absence as a period of genuine grief and necessary solitude following the trauma of her husband's death. And they would neither confirm nor deny any speculation about the nature of their relationship prior to Edward's death. It was as close to the truth as they could safely come without exposing Charlotte to scandal or themselves to social ostracism. "When shall we set the date?" Kenton asked, leading Natalie to a bench beneath a flowering cherry tree. "I was thinking perhaps September," she replied, settling beside him. "Late enough in the season that it won't seem rushed, but not so far away that we must endure a lengthy engagement." "September sounds perfect," he agreed. "And Charlotte, when do we bring her to London?" Natalie considered this carefully. "After the wedding, I think. Let the focus be on our marriage first. Let society accept that as the primary narrative. Then, perhaps in October, we bring Charlotte to town as my daughter, as our daughter, though we'll maintain the fiction of her paternity for now." "For her protection," Kenton agreed, though she could hear the hint of regret in his voice. For her protection, Natalie confirmed. At least until she's old enough to understand the complexities of the situation. Then, perhaps, we can tell her the truth, privately, within our family circle. Our family, Kenton repeated, savoring the words. You, me, and Charlotte, a family at last. Natalie leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. After all this time, all the heartache and separation, it seems almost too good to be true. But it is true, he assured her, tilting her face up to his. And I intend to spend the rest of my life making you believe in our happiness. As his lips met hers in a tender kiss, Natalie felt the last of her fears melting away. The road ahead might still hold challenges, but with Kenton at her side, with Charlotte's future secure, she was ready to face whatever came their way. The forgotten Duchess had not only returned, she had found her way home. September arrived with golden sunlight and a gentle warmth that seemed to bless the occasion. Natalie stood before the mirror in her bedchamber at Westmoreland House, studying her reflection with a mixture of wonder and nervous anticipation. Her wedding gown, a creation of ivory silk with delicate lace overlays, had been designed to strike the perfect balance, elegant enough for a duchess, modest enough for a second marriage, yet with details that spoke of new beginnings rather than lingering grief. Her dark hair was arranged in a simple style, adorned with small white roses and a short veil that fell just below her shoulders. You look beautiful, Your Grace, Morris, her lady's maid, said warmly as she adjusted the fall of the veil. Thank you, Morris, Natalie replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from the silk bodice. Is everything prepared downstairs? Yes, Your Grace. The flowers have been arranged in the drawing room as you specified, and Lady Emmeline is ensuring the final details are in order. Natalie nodded, grateful for her friend's assistance. They had decided on a small, private ceremony at Westmoreland House rather than a church wedding. Given the circumstances, her widowhood, the relatively short period since her return to society, it seemed the most appropriate choice. Only 40 guests had been invited, the same carefully selected allies who had attended their engagement party. A soft knock at the door preceded Emmeline's entrance. Are you ready, darling? The registrar has arrived, and your groom is looking positively dashing, if a bit nervous. Natalie turned from the mirror with a smile, as ready as I'll ever be. Emmeline crossed the room to embrace her, careful not to disturb the veil. You're radiant, she declared, absolutely radiant. Is Charlotte behaving herself? Natalie asked, her thoughts immediately turning to her daughter. She's being an absolute angel, Emmeline assured her. Miss Trent has her well in hand, and she's taking her role as flower girl with utmost seriousness. Charlotte had arrived in London 3 days earlier, brought from Surrey by Miss Trent under the cover of minimal fanfare. She had been introduced to a select few of Natalie's closest friends, including the Fairchilds and Emmeline, who had all been briefed on the official story. That Charlotte was the Duchess's daughter by her late husband, born after his death. If anyone noted the child's striking blue eyes, so similar to Kenton's, they kept such observations to themselves. It's time, Emmeline said gently, offering her arm. Lord Fairchild is waiting to escort you downstairs. Natalie took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. Lead the way. Lord Fairchild waited at the foot of the stairs, resplendent in formal attire, his kind eyes crinkling with pleasure as he beheld her. My dear, he said warmly, taking her gloved hand, you are a vision. Thank you, Edmund, she replied, for everything. Your support has meant more than I can express. It has been my privilege, he assured her, placing her hand on his arm. Now, shall we proceed? I believe there's a rather anxious gentleman waiting for you in the drawing room. The sound of a piano, Emmeline's idea, to provide music for the small ceremony, drifted from the drawing room as they approached. The doors stood open, revealing the transformed space beyond. White roses and ivy adorned every surface, while tall windows admitted streams of September sunlight that bathed the room in a golden glow. The guests stood as Natalie appeared in the doorway, a collective murmur of appreciation rising at the sight of the bride. But Natalie had eyes only for Kenton, who waited beside the registrar at the far end of the room, his expression one of wonder and love as he beheld her. Charlotte stood near him, a vision in pale blue silk, a small basket of rose petals clutched in her hands. She beamed at the sight of her mother, bouncing slightly on her toes in excitement. As the pianist began the wedding march, Natalie moved forward on Lord Fairchild's arm, her steps measured, her eyes never leaving Kenton's. The guests, friends, allies, supporters, smiled as she passed, but they seemed to fade into the background of her awareness, leaving only the man waiting for her, the child who would soon officially have a father, and the future that stretched before them. When she reached Kenton's side, Lord Fairchild placed her hand in his with a formal bow before stepping back to join the other guests. "You're breathtaking," Kenton murmured, his eyes drinking in the sight of her. "As are you," she replied softly, taking in his formal attire, the emotion evident in his face. The registrar cleared his throat gently, calling them back to the ceremony at hand. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Lord Kenton James Queensberry and her Grace, Natalie Elizabeth Harrington, Duchess of Westmoreland, in the bonds of matrimony." The ceremony proceeded with dignified simplicity, the ancient words binding them together before the law and in the eyes of society. When the time came to exchange rings, Charlotte stepped forward importantly, presenting the small velvet cushion where the bands rested. "Thank you, sweetheart," Natalie murmured, touching her daughter's cheek affectionately. Kenton took the smaller of the two rings, a band of gold set with small diamonds that matched Natalie's engagement ring. "With this ring," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I thee wed. With my body I thee worship, and with all my worldly goods I thee endow." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Natalie felt a sense of rightness, of completion, that brought tears to her eyes. She took the remaining ring, a broader band of gold, unadorned but elegant, and repeated the same vows, her voice wavering slightly with emotion as she placed it on his finger. "By the authority vested in me," the registrar proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Kenton lifted her veil, his eyes shining with unshed tears as he bent to claim her lips in a kiss that was both tender and full of promise. Applause erupted around them, led by Charlotte's enthusiastic clapping. "Ladies and gentlemen," the registrar announced as they turned to face their guests, "I present to you Lord and Lady Queensberry." Another round of applause followed, along with calls of congratulation and good wishes. Natalie felt Kenton's arm around her waist, solid and supportive, as they accepted the felicitations of their friends. Charlotte hovered nearby, occasionally darting forward to hug her mother's skirts before retreating shyly when guests attempted to engage her. The wedding breakfast that followed was an elegant but intimate affair, served in the dining room where round tables had replaced the long formal table, allowing for more congenial conversation. Champagne flowed freely, toasts were offered, and the atmosphere was one of genuine celebration. "A triumph, my dear," Lady Pembroke declared, kissing Natalie's cheek, "absolutely perfect in every detail. And your daughter is charming, such a pretty child, and those remarkable blue eyes." Natalie caught Kenton's gaze across the room, sharing a moment of private understanding at the older woman's observation. "Thank you, Lady Pembroke. Charlotte has been looking forward to this day almost as much as I have." "She seems quite taken with Lord Queensberry already," Lady Pembroke observed, watching as Charlotte shyly offered Kenton a piece of wedding cake, which he accepted with exaggerated delight. "Yes," Natalie agreed softly, "they've formed quite a bond." As the celebration continued, Natalie found herself drawn into conversation after conversation, accepting congratulations and well wishes from all quarters. But her eyes repeatedly sought out Kenton and Charlotte, her heart full at the sight of them together, father and daughter, though only they and a select few knew the truth of their relationship. By late afternoon, the last of the guests had departed, leaving only the immediate wedding party, Kenton and Natalie, Charlotte and Miss Trent, and Lady Emmeline, who had overseen much of the day's arrangements. "Well, my dears," Emmeline said, embracing them both, "I believe my work here is done. You have been well and truly launched as London's most romantic couple, and I must say it has been a pleasure to witness." "We couldn't have done it without you, Emma," Natalie said warmly. "Your friendship has been our greatest asset." "Nonsense," Emmeline replied with a wave of her hand. "Your love story sells itself. I merely helped with the presentation." After Emmeline's departure, Natalie and Kenton turned their attention to Charlotte, who had begun to tire after the excitement of the day. "I think someone needs a nap before dinner," Natalie observed, noting her daughter's drooping eyelids. "I'm not sleepy," Charlotte protested, even as she leaned against Kenton's leg. "I want to stay with you and Lord Queensberry." Kenton crouched down to her level, his expression gentle. "How about this, Miss Charlotte? You go with Miss Trent for a short rest, and when you wake up, we'll have a special dinner together, just the three of us." "Promise?" Charlotte asked, his eyes serious as she regarded him. "I promise," he assured her solemnly. With that guarantee, Charlotte allowed Miss Trent to lead her upstairs for her nap, though not without a backward glance that suggested she still feared missing something important. Once they were alone, Kenton drew Natalie into his arms, holding her close as though he could scarcely believe she was finally his wife. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. "Deliriously," she replied, tilting her face up to his. "And you?" "More than I have words to express," he said simply, bending to capture her lips in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Later, after Charlotte had awakened, and they had enjoyed their promised dinner together, a happy, informal affair that bore little resemblance to the usual formal dining of aristocratic households, they faced the delicate question of how to explain the new sleeping arrangements to their daughter. "Charlotte," Natalie began as they sat together in the nursery for her bedtime story, "you understand that Lord Queensberry and I are married now." The child nodded solemnly, like in the fairy tales. "You'll live happily ever after." Natalie smiled, exchanging a glance with Kenton. "Yes, something like that, and because we're married, Lord Queensberry will be living here with us from now on. He'll be like a father to you." Charlotte considered this thoughtfully. "Will he read me stories too?" "Every night if you wish," Kenton promised, his voice slightly unsteady. "And can I call you something else?" Charlotte asked, surprising them both. "Lord Queensberry is very long to say." Kenton looked to Natalie, uncertainty in his eyes. They had discussed how to handle this very question, but had not expected Charlotte to raise it so directly or so soon. "What would you like to call him, sweetheart?" Natalie asked carefully. Charlotte thought for a moment, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "Could I call him Papa?" she asked finally. "Isabel Fairchild has a papa, and she says he gives her piggyback rides and sweets when her mamma isn't looking." Natalie felt tears spring to her eyes at the innocent request, at the simplicity with which Charlotte had cut through the complexity of their situation. "I think," she said, her voice wavering slightly, "that would be perfect, if Lord Queensberry agrees." "Nothing would make me happier," Kenton said, his own eyes suspiciously bright as he reached out to touch Charlotte's cheek. "I would be honored to be your papa, Charlotte." "Starting tomorrow," the child declared with the decisive air that often reminded Natalie of Kenton himself. "Tomorrow you shall be papa." "It's a deal," he agreed, holding out his hand solemnly. Charlotte placed her small hand in his, shaking it with exaggerated formality before dissolving into giggles that lightened the emotional moment. After tucking Charlotte in for the night, with promises of a family outing to the park the following day, Natalie and Kenton retired to their own chambers, now shared chambers, as befitted a married couple. "That went more smoothly than I anticipated," Natalie admitted as her maid helped her out of her day dress and into a nightgown of pale silk. Children adapt more easily than adults, I think, Kenton replied from the adjoining dressing room where his valet was assisting him. They accept what makes them happy without questioning it too deeply. Once their servants had withdrawn, leaving them alone together, Kenton drew Natalie into his arms, studying her face in the soft lamplight. "My wife," he said softly, testing the words. "After all this time, you're finally my wife." "And you're my husband," she replied, her hands resting against his chest. "It seems almost too good to be true." "It's true," he assured her, bending to kiss her with a passion that had been held in check throughout the long day of public celebration. "Very, very true." Later, as they lay entwined beneath the covers, the world quiet around them, Natalie reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the tragedy of her marriage to Edward, through the forbidden passion she and Kenton had shared, to the long separation that had nearly broken them both. Now, against all odds, they were together, husband and wife, with their daughter asleep down the hall, their future stretching bright before them. "What are you thinking?" Kenton murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That happiness, real happiness, is worth any price," she replied, nestling closer to him. "Even the scandal, the whispers, the years apart, I would endure it all again to be where we are now." "As would I," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I prefer to think our struggles are behind us now. The worst is over, Natalie. From here we build our life together, you, me, and Charlotte, the family we were always meant to be." As sleep claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms, Natalie allowed herself to believe fully, for the first time, in the happiness that had seemed so elusive for so long. The forgotten Duchess had not only re-emerged from exile, she had found her way to a joy beyond anything she had dared to imagine. And London society, which had once whispered her name with mingled pity and scorn, now watched in fascination as a love story unfolded before their eyes. A love story that would, indeed, be remembered for generations to come. The end.